Ever wonder what would happen if you entered a store where the doors never close and the lights never go out, where the same people you see every night seem to stay there? The story I'm going to tell you takes place in a forgotten part of the city where the 247 store has become the focus of a mystery that has plagued its security guard, Tom. As he walks through the brightly illuminated aisles every night, Tom has started to piece together a horrifying truth. A group of people enter the store and then leave, while Tom observes. What goes on in this store that people never seem to leave into thin air? In an attempt to save some cash while looking for a better opportunity, Tom began working at the 24/7 store. The labor seemed repetitive at first. The hours went by slowly while he was by himself in the deserted store. But as the days went by, the routine became more and more regular. 5 people would enter the store at the same time every night. A man with a disheveled appearance, an old woman who always wore a straw hat, a young girl wearing a red coat, a boy with curly hair, and a woman with big dark eyes. For a store that never closed, Tom initially assumed they were just regular customers. But what started to worry him was that, in spite of their frequent visits, none of them ever left. His curiosity turned into an obsession, and after watching the security footage, he discovered that not only was his terrifying discovery out of the ordinary, but that all of these people had been missing since the 1980s. The thought of what this meant sent a shiver down his spine. Every time the store door chimed, the realization of their fate set in, and fear constricted his chest. Tom was faced with a conundrum. Should he go up to these clients and inquire as to why they were coming and going without any rhyme or reason? But curiosity held him from leaving, even if a voice in his head told him it was all nonsense and that he should leave because he was afraid of what might happen. Every night, tethered to his post, he plucked up the courage to stay and watch. The first time he chose to follow one of them, the old woman in the straw hat, his heart raced. He felt that what he was doing was wrong, that solving the mystery might lead to a terrible fate. But he couldn't let it go. He couldn't ignore the lost souls trapped in an endless cycle. As he drew closer, he noticed that the old woman was muttering something, a low chant that was nearly inaudible, but reverberated against the store's cold walls. A strange glow caught Tom's attention, and he moved closer, afraid of what he might discover. In position and frozen, the elderly woman's visage was mirrored in a mirror at the end of the hallway, along with the features of former clients who had been warped by time and hopelessness. In that eerie instant, Tom realized that those who went in were stuck and would never come out again. Souls destined to spend all of eternity wandering inside these walls. The echo of their whispers followed him, and terror ate him up like poison. Determined to get out, he turned to run, but the store appeared completely different. The shelves moved, the lights flickered, and the air was icy cold. A terrifying scream, a cry of agony and desperation, echoed behind him as he ran for the door. It was the curly-haired youngster, pleading with him not to abandon him, his face now faded and pallid. Though reason told him he could not help him, Tom felt his heart break. He felt something following him, something he couldn't see but knew was right behind him, as the store door slammed behind him, trapping him in the shadows. Days turned into weeks, and every time he tried to return to the store, an unseen force stopped him. But his mind continued racing with the mystery of the 24/7 store. Where were those customers, and what was actually happening within those walls? Eventually, he managed to open the door and run into the safety of the night, but the enigmatic echo of the store followed him, a never-ending murmur reminding him of the trapped souls that night. When the circle of sadness forced him to go back to work, he was once more confronting the store and experiencing the gloomy curiosity that surrounded him. He decided he had to face his phobia one night and steeled himself. The mood was stronger than when he entered, and he felt as though he was being watched. As he explored, Tom felt he had to talk to them. He heard the low chant that had captured his attention, and he followed it, going deeper into the store until he came to the mirror where he had seen the missing photos. He could only describe the environment as a nightmarish reflection, but it was there, drawing him in. Confusion and bewilderment swept over him as he stared into the mirror, the chant becoming louder and the walls twirling. When the mirror suddenly came to life, The elderly woman's figure resurfaced. Her face, Tom was calm, but unnervingly aware that he was stuck, and that until he could get out, he would be a part of this terrible loop. But time was running out. With a final shout of defiance, he was overcome with sadness at the prospect of becoming another lost person, and panic started to consume him. Desperate to escape the spell that imprisoned him, Tom lunged backward. In a moment of craziness, he was outside the shop again. Silence enveloped him as the door slammed behind him. Tom was aware that he would never be able to go back, that he had barely avoided the 24/7 store's grasp, but that the captive souls within would always be burdened by it. He cautioned people about the business, which turned into a disturbing memory. Tom became aware that something stronger than dread was at work as the wind whirled around him. The need to learn the truth and the impulse to assist people who were unable to assist themselves. Who were the shadow dwellers? All he could do at the moment was share his story and alert others about the business that was open around the clock. But he hoped that one day he would be able to rescue the trapped souls. Some things are better left unknowable, so keep that in mind if you ever consider going in. The next story. Have you ever pondered what might occur if the three kings had unleashed unimaginable terror on the enchanted night of January 6th instead of bringing presents? Martin, an 8-year-old youngster, was about to learn that the custom he believed he understood had a sinister underbelly. As his family got ready to greet the kings, it was going to be a unique time, full of anticipation and optimism. But Martin was different. Because of his curiosity, he did something that no youngster should ever try. He stayed up to catch a sight of the fabled creatures that made kids happy. He sat down in his pajamas in the living room with eagerness. His life would be eternally altered by what transpired at 3 in the morning, despite his best efforts to imagine the enchantment that would soon permeate his house. His heart briefly stopped when he heard heavy footfall resounding overhead, a strong and menacing sound. Martin's blood froze when he slipped to the window and saw what was there. Under the pale moonlight, 3 ghostly figures stood in ragged robes that appeared to have been woven from darkness itself. Their twisted, rusted crowns glinted eerily, yet their features were filled with a blank of shadow rather than joy. Each figure moved with an unearthly grace that sent shivers down Martin's spine. Instead of gifts, they carried big, discolored bags that dripped the viscous, dark liquid. When Martin witnessed the other kids on the street give in to the other king's summons, his curiosity turned to fear. In his head, he could hear his neighbors' muted screams echoing through the walls. With each intentional step the shadows made, the echoes of their wails blended into a spooky symphony, proclaiming that it was the harbingers of horror rather than the beloved Magi with joyful news. One of the individuals turned toward Martin's house, and his heart began to race. Time seemed to stop for Martin. A cold fear flooded his chest as the apparition pointed at him. Its vacant eyes appeared to stare right into his heart. He couldn't help but notice that the other kings had come to take something that was rightfully theirs, not to provide presents. They were ready to capture anyone who attempted to spy on them during their holy night, since they were the guardians of a sinister secret. Martin's heart pounded, and the fear permeated every part of him. In a panic, he questioned whether there was any way to avoid the tragedy that lay before of him. Something within of him rebelled at that moment. He had to muster all his courage because he could not give up without a fight. Martin closed his eyes and concentrated on remembering all of the things he had enjoyed throughout his brief life, such as the games he played in the park with his friends, the laughing they shared, and the scent of the wonderful bread his mother cooked every morning. In his imagination, he created a wall around the family table, where peace had become his haven from the approaching darkness. But the figures kept moving forward, getting closer to the frightened with each step. As he saw the children's cries intensify in his mind, as though their spirits were wailing for assistance, he made the desperate decision to address them in a shaky but resolute voice. Deep down, Martin felt that this might be all he had left to give his pure essence of innocence and hope. So he yelled at the approaching shadows, telling them that he was just a child once, small among millions, and pleading with them to let him live so that his soul and the souls of any other children wouldn't be taken. To his surprise, the vibrations around him started to lessen. The shadows paused, and for a moment, a faint glow lit up their dark faces. Maybe they were evaluating his value, or maybe they had a glimmer of compassion, but then a cold wind blew through the room, and the figures looked at each other as though they were giving each other silent advice. Once again, Martin felt the tension and terror rising in the air. A moment later, they started laughing, and the deep, resonant sound made his blood freeze. One of them added, "Those who look are the ones taken." With a barely detectable motion, they opened their bags, and a dark vapor started to emanate from them, permeating everything in his immediate vicinity. Martin was aware that he had to act with one final shout of defiance if he was going to live this night. A flare of light from outside interrupted Martin's run toward the door in the corridor. Sunlight was starting to creep in on the morning of January 6th. Martin continued despite the coiled shadows and the angry and disappointed expressions on their faces as the light streamed in through the windows. He was aware that daylight was his only hope, and with his heart in his throat, he walked through his house's doorway and over the wall separating his world from that nightmare. After stepping outdoors, he noticed the shadows disappearing behind him. Carrying the world felt different as dawn broke, filled with the echoes of their shouts and the laments of the children who had once been. There were no presents or happiness, and Martin stood on the pavement, shaky and afraid, yet alive. If you ever decide to stay up late on the night of the kings, remember his story. Not everything that glitters brings gifts, and sometimes what lurks in the shadows is the most terrifying of all. The other kings may have tried to claim him, but his spirit had won out, and even though his friends and family would never know the truth of what had happened, he would carry that memory in his heart along with the resolve to never forget that sometimes curiosity can come at a terrifying price. There are always more mysteries to discover, thus the night never really ends.